This is NDTV. And you're watching NDTV Prime. In association with Micromax. Nothing like anything.
In a young country eager for the best quality education, for the best jobs accessible to all, it's not surprising that what the budget has for education for youngsters has been watched so closely. So how did it fare? And more importantly, what about the road ahead? That's what we're looking at today, and a very special panel joining us. We have Lata Vaidyanathan. She's of course the former principal of Modern School Barakamba, also a well-known educationist, Professor Simrat Kaur of the Faculty of Management Studies, Ashish Dhawan, founder and CEO Central Square Foundation, as well as Saurabh Kochar with printvenue.com. Thanks all so much for being with us. Ma'am, if I could start by asking you, what do you believe is the one takeaway from what you heard yesterday? And was there one thing that you believed was missing?
I'll answer this in two parts. First is I'm happy that there's some additional focus on education and the allocation has been enhanced, probably state-wise. Without going into the depth of figures, I want to say that I'm happy that we need to really move on with what is being allocated at a central level as also at state levels. So it's important to have the funding. But the second issue that really bothers me is, I think we'll discuss it slightly later, does increase in allocation ensure quality?
Right, of course. And we're going to, of course, like you said, look at that more closely. But Ashish, besides the focus on skills, which of course we're going to again get into that in a moment, what do you believe is the big takeaway for you? We had always told that, and we know that India is a country of contradictions and not everyone can get access to the best quality education. That's where we are even today. Is there anything that you see in the next couple of years or any vision, let alone the governments, the politicians and the politics that sort of see you, have you seen that changing?
Yeah, so I think the good news with this budget in particular is I see some strategic thinking manifested in this budget. If you look at, say, elementary education in India, we have two large schemes, SSA and MDM, and the allocations to those schemes hasn't improved a lot, and rightly so, because as ma'am was saying, I think we need to focus more on the efficiency of that spend, the effectiveness of that spend, etc. But where they've created new schemes is in areas of putting more money behind teacher training, putting more money behind assessment, and even ICT. So I think those are strategic areas where we were underinvesting. Small amounts of money to start, but I think at least it just shows that there's some strategic thinking reflected there.
Ma'am, just, yeah, go ahead, you want to make a point? Are we talking about the IITs and IIMs here? Because I just want to sort of take the discussion to that since we've brought it up. And there's been, like I said, a lot of debate on it. I mean, there are some who would agree entirely with that. They are models that work, they have proved themselves. We need to try and duplicate that instead of going after a model that hasn't worked for us, has collapsed, or sort of is staring, its failures are staring us in the face. But there are others who say that, it does not, one size does not fit all. You cannot copy paste this model. Where do you stand?
I think I'm in the latter half. I truly believe that while we are increasing the numbers, we are already 15 IITs. Have we brought them to the level? Have we given them the right infrastructure to exceed, to ensure that the people who are coming in get the same skills like Ashish was talking? At par with, let's say, an IIT Delhi or an IIT Roorkee, so the guys who've already been there and done that. So that for me is one. So secondly, I think we have to very efficiently differentiate the what and the how. The problem when we talk about education today is not what. We know what works. We know where we need to have the attention. But the problem is how do we get it? The problem is implementation. But when we talk about industry, when we talk about e-commerce, when we talk about entrepreneurship, we have still not figured the what. So I think what this budget has done well is it has focused on the what when it comes to infrastructure and everything. On the education side, we don't see too much enhanced budget. We have some enhancements in the right areas, but I think the government is trying to focus more on implementation, which to me is the right step.
Right. Professor Kaur, just if we just stay for another moment just with the IITs and IIM argument, where do you stand on this?
See, India is a developing country, and with the demographic profile, there is a dividend which needs to be reaped, undoubtedly. And in terms of our primary education, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, we have reached the masses. And in terms of the higher education, and especially at the upper end, when you talk about the QS certification, the only institutions which come closing, in the top 200 or so are the IIMs or the AIM, the IITs. So duplicating them is certainly a good, desirable, it's at least in the right direction. But notwithstanding the positives of it, I do understand that there is a problem. The new IIMs that have been set up, students are the best of, see, the 99 percentiles are the one who are taking the CAT exam. And setting them just for the heck of distributing one each per state is probably not the best strategy, because we are not trying to have a trickle-down effect. It's not an industry that is being set up in a state which is going to create employment in that area. So, setting up an industry per state is a good kind of a thing, but replicating an educational institution may not necessarily be good. Also, on the other hand, we have observed, even with my own students, that the 99 plus percentile students are not willing to go to the new IIMs at all. The infrastructure is world class. So despite that, there is something amiss within the current system, and the foremost amongst them is the faculty. And it's the same faculty which is also moving between the IIMs. So despite having the same faculty teach at different institutions, and what is working is proximity to metropolitan cities, because that is where the companies are going for the placement. And though it's not a good indicator, but ultimately placements is what has come down to that. And AIMS, setting up of AIMS, I'm all for it. This is something which has to be there in each state, maybe multiple in each state. Why should anybody be moving to a place like Delhi just to be treated and for research work in that area? Yes. So management probably not, but certainly for medical, certainly yes.
Quickly respond to that and then move on.
Yeah, I think we're being unfair in trying to judge these new institutions too quickly. I mean, no education institution gets built in a few years. Even the IIT Delhis or Kanpurs, which are a benchmark, have gotten built over decades, half a century. So, the fact is the brand name exists, the faculty are moving around, you've got the same systems, processes, infrastructure is pretty good. I'm very hopeful. You've got to give it time. I mean, these things take time to mature. They're not going to happen overnight, even with students. As a student, I'm going to hesitate going to the 8th IIM relative to ABC. But it's still, that 8th IIM is still attracting the top 5 percentile, maybe not the top 1 percentile of students, and is probably better than 95% of all the private institutions out there. So if we're looking at solving the country's problem, right, let's not compare just the new IIM with IIM ABC. One, let's give it time. And two, let's compare it with everything that's out there, which is an ocean of mediocrity and scamsters in general. So relative to that, these are still excellent institutions.
Yeah, quickly, and then I'll move on.
I'm just adding on to what he said. In the education sector, unfortunately, a large proportion of the expenditure is a revenue expenditure and not on capital expenditure. With these IIMs, it's suddenly everything going in for capital expenditure. And this is where, after the gestation period gets over and you have your infrastructure set up, over time, certainly it's a step in the right direction, because we need to move from revenue expenditure to capital expenditure, especially so in the education sector.